It's a pleasure having Irina Slav and David Blackmon. May I offer you a cup of coffee?
I love that.
This looks great.
Nothing like a little merchandising.
Yeah.
This is the episode number 35 of the Energy Transition Series. Our topic for today is OPEC Plus production cut and the US reaction, a big reaction. OPEC Plus announced a cut of 2 million barrels a day of oil production. In a world of 100 million barrels a day, 30 million from OPEC countries. David, this happened in the past, hasn't it?
Sure. Yes. Gosh, in 2020, they announced a cut of 8 million barrels a day during the depths of the depression in the industry that the COVID pandemic had created. And they implemented that very rapidly and stuck to it, before in 2021, they began adding back 400,000 barrels a day each month. Um, this one's big. It's 2 million barrels a day. It's probably going to take about a million barrels a day off the market, because of the cartel's under delivery issues that have been going on for a year now. And it's a big cut. It's already had a very significant impact on crude prices. 10% rise in crude prices and the Brent price since the cuts were announced last Wednesday. And this morning, they're just kind of sitting around waiting to see what news breaks, I guess. But I expect the crude price to continue rising. And that, of course, means gasoline prices will rise here in the United States and in Europe and in Brazil and everywhere else. So it's, going to have a significant impact on consumers.
But Irina, can now other producers, I mean other countries outside the OPEC cartel, compensate for this production cut, or depends on who is who buying and selling?
I don't see it happening. If it could happen, then it would be happening already with the US boosting production. But US producers are not boosting production as fast as Washington would like them to. And as David has pointed out on numerous occasions, this is thanks to the deliberate effort of that same Washington. And can Brazil ramp up production significantly in a matter of weeks? No. Can Norway? No. No producing country, regardless of the amount of oil it produces, can increase production within days. As far as I understand from everything I've learned about the industry in the past 10 years or so, this just isn't possible. It can't be done. So we will see high prices both for crude oil and for fuels. And when the EU embargo on Russian oil kicks in December, it will become even more entertaining because prices will go even higher.
Yeah, perfect. But David, the US lose influence in OPEC, no, in Middle East. I mean, because
Oh,
in this case, they are not friends in this relationship.
no, it's very bad. U.S. relations in the Middle East have basically cratered since Joe Biden took office. I really don't understand what the administration's motivation is, but it has been seeming to work very hard to push Saudi Arabia into the Russia and China orbit ever since the day the president took office. And that's after, whatever else one thinks about President Trump, he made tremendous inroads in rebuilding U.S. influence and relations with the Arab nations of the Middle East. And, after years of neglect under Barack Obama, too, I'm not sure what the Democratic Party's motivation is in this country for wanting to alienate basically everyone in the Middle East and insult them. I mean, as we saw when President Biden went to Saudi Arabia in August and refused to shake hands with the Crown Prince. That was taken as a major insult, and it just means that the United States has really no influence. The Biden administration sent very senior representatives to Saudi Arabia in advance of last week's OPEC Plus meeting and told them that a major cut in production would be considered by the United States as a hostile act. A hostile act is the words they used, and that is, that's not the language of diplomacy. It's the language of war and conflict, and it's just not in any way a constructive message to be sending. The arrogance, quite honestly, I've been very disturbed this year by the rank arrogance that United States officials have shown, not just to Saudi Arabia, but to the nations in Europe and really all over the world, particularly since Putin invaded Ukraine. It's been very disturbing to watch, and it's not a good thing for our country. And frankly, I wish it would stop.
You mentioned, David, Irina mentioned too, Brazil. Brazil is producing around 3 million barrels a day, and the consumption is 2. So we have 1 million to export. If the United States did this, we can export for sure. But there is a point, Irina, that I would like to see your vision, your view. Western countries, including the US and other European countries, are fighting against everyone. Everyone that does not think the same or have the same ideas, they fight with. And this is the case of OPEC Plus at that time, and BRICS also is something that they do not support very well. So we are all enemies. So this is something that Brazil, for instance, United States nowadays is not an ally of Brazil. It's rejecting Brazil in some movements. There is a case that Brazil is importing diesel from Russia. What do you see in these relationships related to energy nowadays, Irina?
The relationship between the West and BRICS?
Yes, BRICS and OPEC, every.
Right. Well, I see BRICS and OPEC coming together. Saudi Arabia wants to join BRICS, as far as I understand, and it probably will at some point, unless something major happens. But I don't see anything major happening to turn current relations between the US and Saudi Arabia 180 degrees. I think that what some market and geopolitical analysts have been saying for a while is that we're seeing a change in world order, a change from a US-dominated world order to one that I don't think it will quickly become dominated by the BRICS alliance. But it may be one with a much greater weight of this BRICS alliance, because it's an alliance of really big economies, not as big as the US, but the US in the past 2 years has done so much to destroy itself. I'm sorry to have to say this, but this money printing that David's been talking about and other commentators have been talking about, and the collective West is doing the same thing. Europe too.
Yeah.
They're trying to cope with the pandemic and support the economy in the most unproductive ways. And we've seen where this has led to. But the worst thing is that it's the emerging economies that are suffering much more greatly from these policies of the so-called developed economies, which have turned out to be not so developed if they rely so heavily on the fossil fuel reserves of developing economies. I think the myth of the developed economy has just been shattered by this dependence, and the ones in charge of this dependence, like Saudi Arabia, like Russia, and the other Arab producers, are now reasserting themselves in what could possibly become a new world order. They are aligning themselves with the party, if you will, with a side that they believe will win this confrontation, because we definitely do have a confrontation.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're seeing what I would call, it's a cliche, but we're seeing seismic changes in geopolitics.
Yeah. David, see the same?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely see the same. And I as Irina talks about the emerging countries, as the United States and Western Europe have basically abandoned a lot of the inroads that they had been making into developing parts of the world. What happens is China just comes in right behind us and establishes those relationships and establishes influence with those countries. And they've done the same thing and Russia has too, in South America. As you know, Brazil is importing diesel from Russia, and engaged in all sorts of trading partnerships with Russia and China, and that has been happening because the United States has withdrawn from doing that, and same things happened in Venezuela. I was shocked last week to see the Biden administration going once again asking Venezuela to produce more oil, despite the knowledge that Russia controls about 40% of Venezuela's oil today. And China has established tremendous inroads in trading relationships with Venezuela. And so asking Venezuela to produce more oil is, in fact, subsidizing Vladimir Putin in his war in Ukraine. So it's just the whole world is shifting, and Daniel Yergin predicted this. If you have read his book, The New Map, if you haven't read it, you should. Everyone should, because really he wrote this book. It was published in 2019, I believe, and predicted all of this and projected how trading relationships would shift over Ukraine, over a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And everything, pretty much everything he predicted is happening now, and to me it's so unfortunate because it was all so predictable and avoidable, and no one in a position of authority in the Western world seems much to care about taking steps to avoid any of this. And so I honestly, when you look at how it's all taken place, it almost seems more of a plan than just mere stupidity. And we probably let the Biden administration and the EU and other Western officials off the hook when we say they are merely stupid and not actually, implementing a plan here. And the end goals of which are hard to imagine, but it just all seems too unimaginable to be mere accident.
David, using the same rationale, the internal oil industry production in the United States, can it grow? How do you see
Sure.
it? Oh,
I mean, it could. It could, if the government would get out of the way. What we're running up against now, and the upstream part of our industry takes a lot of heat from the left, because it's not increasing production as rapidly, as it has in the past. But what we're running up against is infrastructure limits. Okay, the Marcellus Shale is has a tremendous lack of export capacity to take gas out of the basin now, because the federal government won't approve interstate pipelines. We see a similar thing happening with the Permian Basin where natural gas is concerned, and even oil as well. And so if you can't move the oil, additional volumes out of those basins where it's produced, then production's not going to grow. This is no great mystery. And that is, without any question at all, a part of the Biden administration's plan for it's part of the Green New Deal plan to limit the ability to produce fossil fuels, to run the prices of fossil fuels up so that wind and solar and electric vehicles become more competitive in the marketplace. and it's working. I mean, you have to give them credit. Their plan is working quite well.
Yeah.
And so that means the United States shale industry is not going to bail the world out on the current shortage of crude oil.
And Irina, how do you see from Europe? You live in Europe. The strategic oil reserves in the United States. So they have, I don't know the number is correct, David, please, 500 million barrels of the strategic oil
It's
reserves.
down to around 400 million
Yes.
now, and it's
Yeah.
going to go lower than that. Yeah.
And they are extracting oil from this reserve, Irina. How do you see this?
Yes, yes. I think the most direct response to the OPEC Plus agreement to cut production was to release even more oil from the SPR. It feels like the Biden administration is reacting to events, which to me speaks of very limited decision-making horizon. Instead of anticipating developments and planning accordingly, they are simply reacting to events already happening, not least because of their previous decisions. So I don't know why this is. I don't know if it's a plan or if it's incompetence. But the fact is that it's not working. Yeah, sure, the release of 180 million barrels of SPR oil did bring prices down, but it brought them down from record highs, so 40-year heights. And now prices are climbing up again. How long can you continue releasing crude oil from the strategic petroleum
Right.
reserve to keep prices under control? I mean, without having to at some point start to replenish this reserve, because it needs to be replenished.
Yeah.
It's a strategic reserve after all.
Yeah.
But they don't seem to be thinking about that, which is scary. It's really worrying.
Yeah, it's really kind of amazing. On the one hand, we see President Biden going out and making speeches warning of nuclear war and talking about how the United States is at war with Russia, which it undeniably is, a proxy war using Ukraine as the battleground. Um, but at the same time, just flooding oil out of our strategic reserve. I had a question on Twitter over the weekend. A fellow asked, how much is the reserve by law required to have in it? And the answer is it is required by law to keep 90 days of petroleum supply of U.S. Supply of, I'm sorry, a volume equal to 90 days of crude oil imports into the country. Well, if you look at the EIA's numbers in July, which is the most recent month that we have data for, the U.S. imported about 9 million barrels of crude oil a day. And if you multiply that times 90, you get 810 million barrels. So we've got about 400 million barrels in it right now. So we're less than half of what we're required by law to have in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And so the administration's in violation of law. They don't care. They don't pay any attention to the laws, really. They're in violation of the OCS Leasing Act as well, by not having a 5-year plan for leasing in the offshore in place. And they don't care about that either. This administration is basically a scofflaw administration when it comes to energy policy. And if we're really at war, we ought to be trying to have as much oil in that SPR as we possibly can. And, they just keep going in the opposite direction. It's really bizarre.
Yeah.
And limiting oil exports is a solution, David?
Oh, a great solution to
Yeah.
to push Brent crude to 150 per barrel.
Yeah. Yeah. I
That'll
mean,
do it.
yeah, it would
Definitely.
immediately. I mean, you can't limit our crude exports because what's being exported is this light sweet crude coming from the Permian Basin and the Eagle Ford Shale and the Bakken Shale, and that we don't have refining capacity for. So limiting the exports would accomplish literally nothing in terms of improving domestic supply of crude. It would simply require operators to shut in thousands of shale oil wells. And as Irina says, the price of crude oil would skyrocket on the global market. But it's just exactly the kind of boneheaded thing I would expect the Biden administration to do.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Precisely because of what you just said, it is very, very possible that the administration will consider this as their next move at some point.
Irina, I suppose the unique solution that they have is to ask Maduro to increase the exports to the United States.
Well, I don't think they can. I mean, they still have trouble producing oil. So
Yeah.
I don't know how this will happen physically.
Yeah, that's right. Technology and companies that were working in Venezuela nowadays are not totally present. I suppose, David, Chevron, any, I don't know other companies that are there.
Yeah, Chevron still has operations there, although they're very limited. And of course, the main reason why Venezuela's exports are limited is because of sanctions that the Trump administration put on Venezuela during Maduro's crackdown on the population in 2019, and his refusal to hold talks with the political opposition. The Biden administration last week said that we would be willing to lessen those restrictions on exports and allow Chevron and other foreign countries to start working to increase production if Maduro's government would engage with the political opposition in some good faith negotiations. But, expecting Maduro's government to do anything in good faith is no different than expecting Vladimir Putin to take action in good faith. It's not really going to happen. We can pretend in order to try to free up some oil to try to keep gas prices down. But everyone knows, nobody really expects that Maduro would honor any agreement. And so
especially with a country that's been sanctioning his country for years.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what's his motivation to deal with the United States in good faith in any event? He has no motivation, particularly with China and Russia now offering their assistance. So it's just another situation where the arrogance of the United States government has placed our country in a no-win situation with a very significant player in all of this. And, it's just incredibly counterproductive international relations by the United States.
And I suppose the unique solution is a solar and wind from California to help this situation.
That's always the answer.
Oh yeah, can you imagine California powering the rest of the United States with its solar power? If only.
Well, they have to import energy from neighboring states every day when the wind stops blowing and the sun isn't shining. California is one of it is the biggest importer of electricity of any state in the United States because of its energy policies. It's an intentional thing.
It also imports quite a bit of crude oil from around the world.
Oh, yes. Mainly from a lot of it comes from Russia. A year ago, most of it was coming from Russia. I don't know that is still the case now.
I recently saw it important, can't remember the figure, but it was more than 10 million barrels, I think, from Iraq as well. And it's importing from Ecuador. There was an analysis of that Ecuador is killing its rainforests to produce oil that it then exports to California.
Yeah.
We saw today the war in Ukraine became worse. And the point is the vulnerability of, oil and gas assets like pipelines, refineries. You see that they must receive additional protection?
It's hard to protect a refinery from missiles. There's not a lot a country can do to really harden defenses against military operations for an industrial plant like an oil refinery or a chemical plant. The United States and Ukraine have so far refrained from attacking Russia's energy infrastructure, although I find it incredibly interesting that the media has gone almost completely silent now about trying to find out who actually sabotaged the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipeline systems. And the Western media has dropped that story. And when that happens to a critical story like that in the past, we find out years down the road that they dropped the story after a request from the United States intelligence community to do so. And that makes me, my initial reaction to that event was that Russia probably did it for a variety of reasons that would take too long to explain. But this media silence now that's been imposed on that story is now leading me to think that the United States probably did that act of sabotage, which is that's a direct act of war on Russia, and means that conflict is probably going to escalate from here, which is really a frightening prospect for everyone.
But about
I hope
refineries,
I'm completely wrong about that.
About refineries, just lighten things up a little. In France, 60% of refining capacity is currently offline because of industrial action. So you don't even need a missile strike on a refinery to have your whole fuel supply chain paralyzed. I mean, there's fuel rationing in France. Drivers are waiting in lines, and if you're not running on fumes, you're not allowed to fill up. So there's more than one way, to compromise a country's energy security when it comes to hydrocarbons.
Energy security, energy transition, lack of oil, problems with gas supply.
Lack of gas as well, yeah.
So many, challenges for the world at this time, no?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's terrible. It's a disastrous situation that is only going to get worse because the people making the decisions are utterly incompetent to deal with a crisis like this.
Incompetent bureaucrats. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. Or arrogant politicians.
Arrogant politicians, yes. Yeah. That's right. It was nice. Appreciate having David Blackmon and Slav today, this Monday. Every week we are here, no?
Every week.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Y'all have a wonderful week. I hope it's not as bad as what I made it seem.
Yeah, we weren't very funny today. Probably
next week.
Oh,
gosh, I'm
we
sorry.
can talk about gas.
Good. Yeah, have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.